Current U.S. strategy undermines stability and increases Taliban power source. 17. The campaign is ineffective when advanced counterterrorism operations do not address the underlying problems. The U.S. is likely to undermine the fight against the Taliban strikes to eliminate the only source of income for many without providing a replacement foster resentment of military presence. The already unpopular central government of the U.S. failed repeatedly to reduce poverty and opium. The Afghanistan remains the world's largest producer of the problematic area. The Taliban are dependent on opium. The evidence is far from clear. Opium is not the only source of funding. The Taliban got most of its money from illegal taxation in the Gulf nations rather than their drugs for estimates made typical for policymakers to accurately assess the problem and determine effective policy response to the local communities are dependent on opium, not the Taliban. Taliban controlled areas of people prefer to be governed by the insurgents because the group was allows locals to cultivate poppy. The residents of the fleet to places controlled by the Taliban. The drug economy is the only source of income for many farmers left with no viable alternatives. With the strict measures struggle will not damage reliance on poppy and defense. Poppy's rooted in lack of security, government control. The attacks are angry local residents and prop them to favor the insurgents. Having support for the government using force targeted poor farmers is problematic. It's ineffective and increases drug production. Yelka 18 approaches are counterintuitive and have produced the opposite outcomes. The attempts at eradication have resulted in more acres being planted, more opium-based tactics for interdiction have resulted in consolidation of the drug industry. Allies manipulate the campaign and redirect efforts in order to eliminate the competition. It actively trades off with effective counterterrorism studies and econ theory prove help Blanco 16 the anti-drug operations strengthen the Taliban and undermine the war on terror. The consequence of prohibition's cartel drug policy doesn't offer the Taliban profitable business opportunity, drives Afghan citizens towards the terror. Many of poor farmers' policy automatically criminalize a large segment that has caused many sure Taliban has began offering protection. This not only gives ordinary citizens a stake in Taliban, it successfully makes them less likely to cooperate with coalition forces of the new government that attempts to reduce the drug trade are failed and are effectively undermining the war on terror. The plan ends the Western war on Afghani farmers. Chirvanch 18 the bomb was endorsed by UNODC. The report of mention ongoing assassinations of bombing in addition to being complicit in targeting civilians and Afghan CEO UNODC directly supported violent campaigns to run hanging tractors. UNODC focused on easily measurable criteria to the detriment of individuals who face marginalization, imprisonment, and death as a consequence of the policies and stability in Afghanistan. Implodes Pakistan's stability. Penny 16. Afghanistan's neighborhood has become influenced by multiple competition, nuclear armed regional states. Iran shares border with Afghanistan. Tehran is concerned that increased stability in Afghanistan has potential to adversely affect the security of competition. Afghanistan places an important geostrategic position to influence stability and security of various South and Central Asian regions. Direct influence of Afghanistan, stability on security of Pakistan. Pakistan can influence the global energy supply. Any failure or destabilization within Pakistan state has the potential to have a knock-on effect on South Asian stability. Success of the Taliban may lead to failure of Pakistan government's security state of Afghanistan as a key component of the region, vital to access to energy resources, and that caused global nuclear war. Roosevelt 11 that Pakistan has long been a nuclear war ready to happen in regional war, turn global terrorism escalates. China comes to aid Israel retaliates against Russia, drawing the U.S. into collaboration's government is unstable. Expecting American intervention may well feel that it is the users of this fragile central Pakistan government can fall in the hands of extremist Pakistan's the most immediate potential nuclear flashpoint. We face policy. Plan text the United States ought not provide counter-narcotics military authoritarian regimes in Egypt. Plan ends counter-narcotics ops. Michael McCoy 17 the Taliban said rises has paralleled the growth of Afghanistan's opium production by every conceivable metric. We feel production, cultivation, eradication, and eradication are down to financial support to the insurgencies that trust the decision to double down is doomed to failure. Washington has tried every potential counter-narcotics option, with the exception of failed experimental approaches, and none worked. This failed to curtail trafficking and alienated the residents that government desperately need to win over to encourage illicit production. The NIU is what's left. Their reason will lapse are proven futile. True productions I'll make all counter-narcotic stops counterproductive. DoD agrees Carpenter and Prequel 14 with U.S. slated to reduce its presence in the problem is likely to get worse. Afghanistan is ideally positioned to fulfill that demand because of its relative proximity, because they allowed internal security environment attempts to eradicate supplies and access and futility efforts to wage a war crusade against war. Drugs were more ill-advised. The DoD's effectively declared counter-narcotics efforts lost, not worth fighting any longer. Mark at longer, it's key to hearts and minds with solve stability. Band 14 eradication was difficult enough with backup with military presence, larger traffickers consolidated control of the drug industry. Eradication ignited violent strikes and social protests. Poppy farmers came to constitute a key base of support for Taliban, denying intelligence to the allied force while providing to the Taliban eradication efforts inflated Taliban revenue so that they counter-narcotics campaign redirect opium protection to Taliban controlled areas and ways for poppy pricing and strategy was succeeding in the best circumstances to suppress drugs going to lose geopolitical war. Mark the card at war. The forever war in Afghanistan is the central issue of foreign policy, comparatively more important than every other app putting on the back burner collapse the credibility of U.S. policymaking and empowers Trump-like figures to attack expertise across the board. Solution requires nuanced and focused analysis of all 18 the contemporary U.S. foreign policy with no shortage of worthy candidates. Blake check the U.S. given to millions of allies all over the contenders, but the most indefensible aspect of U.S. foreign policy remains never-ending effort in Afghanistan. The war's cost the U.S. more than $1 trillion. Opium productions at an all-time high, despite billions spent on eradication. 7 years of U.S. policy in Central Asia gives possible why the U.S. federal officials lack the detailed local knowledge necessary to not understand the complex and subtle networks that they were trying to work with. It's easy to forget about distant wars like this continue because it's easy to forget about a distant war that's earlier mentioned. We should not lose sight of the long-term political consequences of the Afghan war because the DC claim to authority, insight, expertise, and integrity. This makes it easier for someone like Trump to disparage leads and awards advice on other issues. Framework. The values morality standards maximizing expect well-being debate requires focusing on prioritizing mitigating material violence and focusing on the problem as opposed to generating discussions on how to solve concrete oppression laws. Academics and students allow their responsibility to reducing injustice and complexity of social problems because that they have to prioritize action. Second is that intuitions that oppression and death are bad must be prioritized in your ethical calculus since people instinctively want to avoid them, but they preclude the possibility of other values. Extinction outweighs harm. 15. The reducing accuracy was more than their trillions upon trillions of future people well-being was given 0.1% when mark hard. At weight the average claims that universal liberal principles. 17. The build a broad movement that to catch challenge plutocracy, patriarchy, and white supremacy successful appeals to principles Americans already endorse. Liberalism policies continue to function of dominant group interests rather than result in an conceptual logic. The progressives should try to retrieve liberalism for radical democratic gender rather than rejecting the initial watching which asks when people making generalization about liberalism is one particular variety of liberalism. Do you mean our generalization really true about all possible kinds of liberalism? Only subset liberalism is the universal suffering morally of human species. We need to take into account that hypothetical liberalism that could generate phenomenal the limits for liberalism driving the conceptual normative resource of liberalism. We need to try and destroy radical agendas and normative resource of liberalism rather than writing off liberalism. Not credit liberalism, or I guess writing off liberalism.
Did you read the B.4 under framework?
Yeah, the death.
And you read the Palmer card?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I marked the Palmer card.
Where'd you mark it?
At 0.001% weight.
Okay, sure, that's fine. On your solvency contention, on the last card, it says that people like Trump-like figures. What are Trump-like figures?
So, populist figures that attack that rail against the foreign policy bloc who drive decision making in Afghanistan. They say that those elites are not in American interest, and they ignore foreign policy advice.
Your card makes specific analysis as how Trump is, I guess, unexceptional figure in U.S. foreign policy. Why is that?
What do you mean? Why is Trump an exceptional figure?
Yeah.
He has diverted. He's I guess diverged from the trend of presidents that work in line with the U.S. foreign policy.
What is U.S. foreign policy?
U.S. foreign policy has changed considerably over the last few decades.
Okay, on your first advantage, contention 1, why does the war on drugs exist in Afghanistan?
The war on drugs exists in Afghanistan because the U.S. wanted to undermine the Taliban. Well, after we invaded Afghanistan, they wanted to stop the drug trade because they thought it would be bad for the homeland, and because of that, we started.
Okay, so what does the 1AC do to stop the drug trade?
The 1AC ends counter-narcotics military aid because the counter-narcotics operations we were doing are counterproductive and lead to things like airstriking Afghani farmers, which only drive them into the arms of the Taliban. It's also very impressive and just very violent. We shouldn't be airstriking farmers.
What branch of the government does the plan?
We defend the United States team with the plan.
What branch of the United States?
We don't specify.
If I read a card that contextualizes it to normal means, will you specify? You can see that.
We can contest the normal means evidence read by the 1NC, but we do not specify beyond the United States.
Okay, sure, that's fine. On your framing debate, you make an argument as to why existential threats deserve attention. To how likely or probable must existential threats be in order to be worth deliberating about?
So, you can engage in a risk calculus, just multiply the probability of the scenario happening times the magnitude or the value.
How do you quantify things like probability and magnitude? And
right, exactly. So then, if you can't, which is why asking the question what the probabilities need is also
Okay, is 1% risk of nuclear war sufficient enough to affirm?
If it outweighs negative offense.
No, I'm asking, what is your conception of weighing? How do you weigh between impacts as on?
We believe that existential threats should be prioritized between existential threats.
Okay, what's an existential threat?
One that threatens the existence of the human species.
What's the human species?
People identified as Homo sapiens.
Okay, sure, that's fine. Setting the doc is one-off case during the framing. Genocidal settlement is not a one-off event, but a structural ontological logic of elimination constantly manifests in the everyday iteration of Western law and settler governmentality. The act deepens the reliance on the global regime of settler sovereignty and extends the biopolitical state of the ultimate arbiter of life across the world. Morganson 11. White supremacist settler colonization produces the proposed biopolitics that impose the regime of global government. The logic of elimination constitutes settler governance and genocide of indigenous peoples. The biopolitical process specific to settler colonialism structures demanding which white societies universalize Western law within their global opinion as Europeans, establish new people settled by practicing exception of the law that permits and eliminating indigenous peoples to define settlers as those who replace settler colonialism, informs present colonization, global capitalism, and modernity, international governance. Settler colonization can be naturalized and theorizing its constitution as biopower and decolonization, the global south, the capitalist recognition, the universalization of Western law and global governance, ensures that location genealogy was the colonial era never ending. Settler colonialism means the naturalized activity protecting Western law and exception across global scale today. Government telling acts of power to make, live, or let die, the extra legal sphere managing persons concerned with tactics that depend on the question of sovereignty, consigning certain subjects to a state of bare life. Settlers colonized come to say evasion is a structure, not event, assertion of sovereignty, ground, Western law, logical elimination, settler colonialism, purposeful genocide, elimination may follow efforts to produce life to navigate indigenous peoples, cultures, lands, to settle a nation. This raises the possibility of indigenous nationalities challenging the progress of settler nation to replace them on its own lands. And the heroin trade boomed in Afghanistan as a direct result of the CIA's attempt to control regional instability. The affirmative asks you to trust the very system that created violence in the first place. Sound familiar? Miller 218. The heroin trade experienced an expensive boom. The CIA funded reactionary tribes and guerrilla forces in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's government took a hardline and anti-narcotic stance which challenged the semi-autonomous tribes and opium exports. Opium production rose as the CIA feverishly supplied opioids to Afghanistan, began the dominant export of heroin. Slow production was not a priority for the United States government. CIA's negligible looking the other way towards drug trafficking was explosively displayed the rise of crack cocaine epidemic. And the app offers up an action guided by acknowledgement of U.S.'s responsibility for past atrocities. This is an empty gesture designed to relieve collective settler guilt and open up the space for settler futures. Madison 12. National identity is a crucial component of understanding collective guild, a shared membership in the category of offenders. National identity is connected to feelings of actors or forebears. Those that are forebears committed harm in the collective guild may be safely promoting for identity, process feelings of distress. The race has been used to ensure the population of indigenous peoples always on the clan, reinforcing white settler superiority. Non-indigenous people at the time believed assimilation or advancement, work which determined participation in white society would offer the best people out of poverty. Advancement was really more white, less black. The colony's policy reminded the structural policy of justice part of the colonial project. Nationalism has an important role in starting positive national identity. Citizens can feel good, the land and fair, go drive pleasure and feeling that the shares of value of equality, individuals and collective are motivated to improve their social national identity. This type of vulnerability. Others may feel a strong attachment to the national group and allows them to experience feelings of guilt and moral responsibility. Those who deny collective guilt are likely to endorse representation strategies that aim to restore psychological equity, acting negatively throw into stress and inequality, and cutting recognition to vulnerable settlers because does not provide justice, but rather for any fundamental changes. International theory on restitution for historical wrongdoing emphasizes the importance of role of guilt and atonement in transforming national experiences into constructive political situation. People felt a sense of burden being lifted, thought that this finally ended the culture that so deeply scarred the national soul. And isopolitics is that you should call into question their authority to legislate in the first place. The ideological iteration of autonomous settler political selfhood is the organizing logic of settler colonialism. The settler understands self as containing lawmaking capacity across states. You should refuse settler subject formation, favor a disorientation that refuses and moves authority on stolen land. Rifkin 13. Orientation is making the strange familiar for the essential bodies of space, routine that produces orientation, making alien occupied space offers possibility for seeing and keeping ways that take less regard to the jurisdiction nation of the state. Becoming conscious of everyday and active settlement rise really between a autonomous extra political self instead of putting up a recognition not only the enduring parts of the active history of this person that probably continue conditions of possibility for the settler. Non-natives may adopt a particular viewpoint of supporting indigenous property and devoted parts of the the absence of the masses on just away, quotidian violence, experiences of space, subject to the effective nature and iterates settler sovereignty. Houses settler body public composed in everyday ways, settler commons as aids to reiterate self-evidence of settler geopolitics. And the role of the judge is to vote for the debater who best opens up a space for indigenous future making. Western rationalists thought within education spaces like debater part of a colonial now approach to traditional policy making outsources the agency to supposedly neutral 0 point and perpetuates epistemic detachment and colonization. Curve 14. The Enlightenment has established objective foundations for knowledge taken by Descartes' law as the rationalist foundation establishes its own perspective on position methods and stabilize the connection between modern epistemology and colonial dominance. Western civilization presumed itself the point of reference of global history and imperial structure of coloniality and created conditions to build a controlled structure of knowledge grounded in the word of God and reason of true coloniality, the permanent spatial temporal structure of material and discursive epistemic practices in the institutional spaces. The 0 point relates to the privileged naughty, knowing unoccupied detached point of observation from its neutral place maps the world of classifies people's project orders to the Western modernist view of knowledge dominates by masquerading universal knowledge presents itself as a godlike view of truth. We are global in the situation of epistemic monopolization that produced a monoculture of scientific knowledge and adequate to understand meaningful questions in practice epistemic recognition and recognizing the absence and the presence of diverse knowledge is best to colonialism. The cohesive alternation of other philosophies, colonial lens requires a penetrable ontology to understand the geopolitical relation to colonial privilege. Epistemic practices emerge from our practices in social life and real life places. Those who take knowledge and leave power behind are operating within privilege of history and occupation of indigenous territories, reality made visible in the Eurocentric educational institutions. Thus, the only alternative is absolute decolonization. Tucking in 12. An ethic of incommensurability stands in contrast to reconciliation with settler new citizens. Reconciliation without risking settling normalcy through settler future reconciliations concerned with questions of what will decolonization look like, what will consequences for the settler. Incommensurability acknowledge that these questions need not be answered. Decolonization is the existence framework. Decolonization is not obliged to be answered. It is not accountable to settlers or settler future. Decolonization not accountable to indigenous sovereignty and future need. These answers are not fully viewed, cannot be decolonization remains punctured by metaphor. We will find the answers to lead the filling act. The ethic of incommensurability means relinquishing settler future future, evading the hope that settlers may one day become mental to native peoples and native futures, to live in what the settlers just called the unknown possibility of the ethics and incommensurability. Decolonization offers a different perspective on human civil rights based approaches that has unsettling one another to complement our own. Decolonization is not an and, it is an elsewhere. And asterisk is that the permutations of token gesture that moves indigenous to the margins and similar to sovereignty, tapping U12. Buddhist citizens, asterisk peoples, indigenous people are counted in code for representative of individuals and nature members can asterisk peoples provide settled up to innocent the racial within settled colonization take position. Families that are trying to prefer to which can interrupt their observation of the economy. The success is to be able to continue the asterisk is a token gesture, the asterisk for the body count, the body count for indigenous policy making epistemologies. Our case. One, group their A and B point is just a question of policy making. We can extend further that this is a genocidal paradigm that recreates things like colonial power matrix and structures. Any net benefit that they have to talk about materiality is always going to be outweighed by ratcheting up the level of abstraction in order to understand the colonialism as a macro structure that controls the way that violence happens. Now, the internal link here is like things like political education, however, we impact term the notion of things like progress within political, which means there's no internal net benefit. And two, they say existential threats. One, the spectral extinction is a result of settler united that rise not only from settlers' guilt for destroying the planet's ability to sustain itself, but also from settlers' need to strengthen solidarity and for confrontation with colonial genocide. Now, 16. A key metaphor of the settled future is extinction. The concept of the settlers is subject to comparable to the elimination of indigenous peoples or even and humanity itself. Extinction operates as a method of disvalidation. A metaphor that enables survival, allowing settlers to avoid a true reckoning with establishment of settled criminal social powers. The settled subject is fine as one who comes from elsewhere but tries to take the place at home, yet the transformation must remain incomplete with the desire to come at home. Necessarily, no specter of the native whose existence cannot be disavowed as far as the settlers born. Settler decolonization is inconceivable because settlers lack clean metaphorical tools to imagine their own demise. Mark their demise, and two, this is supercharged by the fact that their understanding of things like humanity is always so basic that the cross-sectors prove that humans are ones who are identified as Homo sapiens, which prove that their understanding of things like existential threats only bother to think about the moral calculus, which means that things like indigenous people who are always coded as seen as invisible and not human are not concluded. And on their mills card, American deals of free society and democracy use concealed genocide are justified by exploitation of detrimental land and resources. Baker 17. Settled societies promise greater recognition and description of that the claims of sovereignty go unheard institutions, but especially remaining place needs to stay brutalized. It's seen that the ongoing refusal of federal governments to offer treaties and indigenous nations genocide and company who do that's definitely included in the marketplace of the liberal state are premised on the elimination of genocide and people. The Indian Americans and the other two liberal democracies that reaches around the settlers, so many people live the spaces of barren wilderness, mark their card at wilderness, and this also implicates their card. Now, they will stand up in the one AR and say that they are a link to the colonialism. However, they have not won any epistemic foundation to their understanding of the world, nor that they justify things like settler future and even extending the United States infinitely across the future, which is an easy reason to vote nay. And also on their liberalism argument, the idea that we can be redeemed or American ideals can somehow be modified is the link to the category.
Status of critique.
Unconditional.
How does the theory of settler colonialism explain the war on drugs in Afghanistan?
So the argument is that things like opium, like indigenous farmers and people indigenous to the land had a different understanding and relationship to things like opium. I.e., it was just a plant that they used for things like
war on
farming.
drugs was a way of combating indigenous tribes, which means that the war on drugs
that's not what I
bad.
said. I said that the AF's representation of the war on drugs as drugs and heroin as something that sort of sustains and fuels this is something that is bad. And then also things like interventionist policy, i.e. the United States justifying its intervention in the area as an imperative in order to save the world, which the 1AC does, also created things. Like, I know that you're going to stand up and be like, look, it's a link term, like we're getting out, it's negative state action, but the way that the plan is justified is consistent with historical systems that propped up settler colonialism.
How does the AF justify U.S. intervention if it stops countermeasures?
Unless the plan happens, that the world is going to explode. That's literally affirmative.
How does that justify U.S. intervention?
You have projected the United States into the future as an entity that is sovereign and an entity that has things like legislative capacity. This taps into, and you have justified this by providing things like extinction scenarios and apocalyptic scenarios, among other links. This is particularly bad because it mirrors the way that the settler always sees himself as an imperative to things like stability in the world. Even if you win this action is good, you have not won that your orientation towards the world is good. And independent of that, the Madison link specifically talks about the idea that the United States can somehow rectify all the messed up things that they've done by ceasing to act. The idea that this a sort of genealogy of the history of the world.
So the U.S. shouldn't act to solve settler
The United
colonial
States should not
actions?
exist.
Okay, let's talk about the alternative. Is the alternative actual, physical, like we get off the land decolonization?
Yep.
Okay, does the negative fiat this?
It's like an orientation that we should endorse and the only ethical
Okay,
thing.
so
Insofar as the
is the
alternative does it.
Is the alternative an ethical orientation?
The
or
alternative
does it
says that
defend
everyone
actual
should get up the lawn. That is
decolonization?
the only ethical thing option. If you want to call that fiat, you can. If they act
Is
like
that an ethical orientation? If I read an argument for why this is a bad strategy, will the two in our pivot to? No, but it's an ethical orientation, not an actual strategy.
No, it is literal physical decolonization.
Okay. The Miller card, it identifies specifically the CIA's, or it identifies counter-narcotics as a way to challenge autonomous tribes and the autonomy of tribes by challenging their opium exports. Does this mean that?
No, it specifically says that the CIA began an anti-narcotic stance, and the reason why, because they started fueling things like insurgent groups in the area in order to topple the government, which the 1AC also tries to do. It's just a mirroring argument. You can claim that it's distinct, but the same looking the other way at the drug trade with ulterior motives of toppling a larger regime is consistent.
Stop, prep, 326 left, I'll send out. This order will be, okay, similar critique. Send.
Are you starting on case?
Yeah. Everyone else is ready?
Vote F to stop the U.S. airstriking Afghani farmers. It results in it drives them into the arms of the Taliban, which fuels regional instability. That causes that spills over to Pakistan, causes nuclear war. We are not there. A greater abstraction. We pay attention to the material ways to address violence by promoting policy actions that have been proven effective even by their own league evidence. We'll answer the second call is a macrostructure on the critique. They say extinction is settler guilt. Preventing extinction is compatible with decolonization. Extinction eliminates the choice to refuse to create future balance matching condition futures within settler still changes the conditions of possibility without relying on linear time. That justifies the permutation. Early attempts to redrawing the real, drawing attention to the possible by showing condition becomes a strategy of decolonization. Realism is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Imagine futures by their eventuality is the material effects in the present, making certain things possible. Historical determinations rendered the native nations futureless and indigenous lands of farmers are most damaged by an ongoing mining, processing, testing, and dumping activity. See all their possibilities and couple them with their own past and futures described deconstructing wholly configured timelines. Our ethical calculus does not exclude indigenous people. They have no warrant for this, and it is just a story. Democracy or liberalism is not, or liberalism can be. We can reclaim liberalism. Or Mill's evidence says that it assumes a current version of liberalism and all the hypothetical liberalism that we can create. Hypothetical liberalism we can create using the normative resource of liberalism will answer the epistemic stuff on the critique. Miller flows F. It talks about how the war on drugs in Afghanistan was to limit tribes and Native Americans, which means stopping that counter-narcotics effort is good. Their isopolitics are argument 2 response. First, it leads to unilateral disarm. Only people who sympathize their argument will stand down. The people who disagree will not. Also, they are settlers. So whether it's non-equal or working to combat psych selves, in which case we don't link. We stop U.S. intervention. We don't say drugs bad. Those are their 2 aspecific linkers, both of which are the opposite of what the case is. The role of the judge cast a provisional valid on who did the better debating. Anything else is arbitrary, self-serving, and impact justified. The cross-wire extension of Mills onto this page, no forefront and dishonor permutation, or no asterisk center permutation, forefronts, indigenous peoples, and politics permutation do both the war on drugs and extension of settler colonialist practices, Ali, and eliminating the criminalization of the global drug control scheme as an extension of colonizing the early settlers and precursor to war on drugs and the fisheries control cost and furious propagated and energetic substances for mushroom to BOT. The settlers stripped the indigenous communities of healing substance, coke, and opium, provide evidence for hypocrisy, radicals, justice, both how the history of use by indigenous people, prohibition of drugs and criminalization of tools of dominant political frameworks and indigenous cultures, decolonizing drug use means that we recognize intercontinental colonization and genocide, enslavement of indigenous peoples, and create policies that reduce the hard tolerance of colonization. It means that we promote their leadership and repair harms caused by colonization, and framing settler colonialism through totalizing lands makes indigenous liberation possible by saying the terms of victory is all or nothing pessimism, actively reify settler dominance must reach 18. This narrative deficit where it comes to imagining settler decolonization, the structural perspective that closes down the imagined social and political transformation. There is a tautological discrepancy where the only solution to neoliberalism is a decolonization which paradigm renders unachievable, yet in trying to elucidate the logical elimination is the overarching historical force. It is operational weakness whereby such a logic is simply the omnipresent manifesting where it appears not to be the scholarly needs to read in a situation. There is a powerful ontological dimension where there is such thing as settler will institutionally reconquer native can ever push back, but if paradigms not offer the hope of a liberated future, the cycle colonialism will list one story telling total victory, total failure of the category distinction reasons that the frontier must be maintained. There will struggle against the fact fatalism has gone under critique for reviving settler colonialism as a better structure where colonial relations are inevitable. Not only are a marked card and inevitable, their cartography or refusal makes native survival impossible. Argument isn't that the state is ethical, but rather we shouldn't embrace the barrier of state good or state bad because there are certain aspects of the state that are necessary to survival and their theory is unethical. If it condemns native people to death for some greater ethical absolution, they would deny water supply and using highways to get to hospitals. That's bad.
You didn't read Voice 15 or any of the cards below that.
No.
4 minutes starting now. Okay, a short overview. Oh, really? Case. So great.
Ended up with me.
I'm just saying.
Short overview.
Yeah. Everybody ready? Settler colonialism is a global structure of eliminance that seeks to erase indigenous sovereignty and extends itself as the biopolitical arbiter of life across the globe. The one I see is an extension of Western law into the future that infinitely allows for things like manipulation of sovereignty and assumes the legitimacy or redeemable capacity of the United States. Now, they have conceded the Madison link, which independently turns case. The link says that the analysis of, they have the whole conceded in the 1AR. There's no ink on it, which means that you can send it here. It specifically says that an analysis of a recommendation for U.S. policy based on analysis of past doing is just an impulse, a reaction of collective guilt. It is an acknowledgement of the United States mess up in past and trying to rectify that or make it somehow ethical. Through the action of the 1AC. You can extend lines from the 1AR and explain that this is exactly what the affirmative tries to do. It is a recognition that the United States has caused something bad and uses that to inform policy. This opens up space for things like settler futures because it allows the United States to become redeemable. Now, even if you don't think that this is entirely what the 1AC is, or they can get away with their state bad claims, it is still a justification for policy which is independently bad. Insofar as they've conceded all of the progress impossible in the ontological relationship of the law to indigenous peoples, the reason as to why it's never redeemable, and this link independently turns and outweighs case because it proves that their instance of the 1AC is just a reactionary policy designed to relieve things like settler anxieties in the first place. This is conceded in the 1AR. Don't give them any 2A arguments. Now, the second link I'm going to go for is the liberal idealism argument, which they've also conceded. Their only argument here is that they were going to try and redeem and get rid of things like normative liberalism and make it somehow better. However, you should read the Mills card. It specifically says that we should take American ideals that people already value in order to improve them and push them to something better. This begins with a starting point that our understanding of the world is somehow redeemable, which also means that their project is something that is a self-fulfilling prophecy that will always recycle and lead back to the same negative impact. Now they have also not answered the serial impact of word that says that insofar as the relationship between the state and the people never changes, the reason as to why all of their policies are doomed to fail. That's the extension of the Miller card that I'm going to go for. That the only reason why the war on drugs exists because the United States assumed the authority and legitimacy to take action, which the 1AC relies on. Now, I was surprised after this in the 1AC that the 1AR was going to pivot for this link turn argument to justify the perm. However, they have not wanted defense of their epistemic understanding of the world or the projection of the state into the future. Now, I extend the alternative. It says that absolute decolonization. The only argument they made in the 1AR against it was cartography refusal. I didn't read that alt. It is a literal surrendering of the land, which means that they solved the entirety of the case with no risk of a dissent. It means to give back the land and endorse an ethic of incommensurability. It says that the only ethical orientation to the one towards the world is one that is absolute decolonization. There's no solvency deficit on the alternative, which means that it solves all of the 1AC because in a world where the United States does not enlist and is not legitimate, it cannot fund things like counterterrorism, that counter-terrorist efforts in Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is the reason as to why it solved. Now I'll answer their line-by-line arguments now. One, they say the isopolitics is said. One, they say that it unilaterally disarms. However, one, this is a jurisdictional claim that says that you cannot policy role and role play the United States if it's something that's unethical. Your assumption that you can is something that is independently bad. And then two, they say that they're settlers. However, advocating for absolute decolonization is different and distinct from advocating for things like settler futurity. It opens up space for indigenous self-determination, which solves something impacts. Now, on their role of the ballot, they have conceded my role of the ballot is the only way to guarantee an ethical orientation towards the future. Things like settler futurity always crowd out indigenous futurity, which means that even if the role of the ballot is to do the better debating, you should view this through a lens of indigenous futurity. They have not went in deep on this claim, which is why you can extend it. Now, two, on the permutations, group the perm debate. Now, the perm debate, there's several dissents to the perm. One is that asterisks is that their only argument is that it forefronts indigenous liberation, but insofar as we want to risk of a link and proves that their paradigm is a self-fulfilling prophecy of the status quo. And then two, they've conceded the Kerr 14 card that says that policymaking and assuming the United States can be used and repurposed as a conceivably neutral point is something that is independently bad, and that this type of role-playing is particularly genocidal. Now, they say the Busbridge card, two answers. One, self-determination solves. It's a question of, even if giving back the land might seem impossible in the short term, it opens up a space for indigenous self-determination, which means it's not all or nothing insofar as the terms are set by indigenous people. And then two, they're behind on the this question. They have not won any policies are coming out or any good reform are coming out, which means that even if fatalism is guaranteed, it's not unique. Now, they say cartography of the state, however, one, the state is not ethical. They say that they recognize the state is not ethical. Then why have they chosen to extend it into the future? If it is true that the state is irredeemable, no pragmatic claims just justify a constant. And two, they say that they never use the state, but however, they've considered that every use of the state is genocidal and taps into the erasure of things like indigenous sovereignty in the first place, which means that the 1AC is doomed to fail, which means that the alternative is the only risk of solving all of their offense on case. The 1AR is too light on the framing debate. We have impact turned all of their notions of materiality and policy action. We say that materiality focus is the settler's tool to ratchet down the conversation to the level of pragmatics, which is how they sustain an affirmation in the status quo. Only by rejecting and viewing things as a macro-structural and settler colonism as an organizing principle is the only way to understand it as a macro-structural, which means that even if they stand up in the 2AR and say that people are dying, it just proves that ratcheting down the conversation to the level of the particular is the settler's MO. Now, they say that policy actions are good and that education over mechanism and material consequences are good, but insofar as we've impact turned their notion of things like political discourse and the one that the alternative solves the case, there is no net benefit to the perm. Now, on their settler futurity argument, one, they say that presenting extinction is not compatible. However, we say that extinction and understanding of consequences is not incompatible with the alternative, but that settler futurity is bad. They've considered the Warren and the Daly card that specifically says that settlers fantasize over their own death in order to justify the extension of the settlement of the state into the future, which is the reason as to why their notion of things like preventing extinction as a decolonial possibility that disrupts the time and justifies the permutation is something that is necessarily incorrect because the justification for their extinction narratives is not the same. And two, it does not foreclose analysis of consequences which resolves all of their materiality claims, but rather those analysis of consequences must be done through the lens of things like the alternative, because it's the only way to open up spaces for indigenous futurity, which has things like radical emancipation and necessity. And two, insofar as they've considered the ontological relationship of the state to indigenous people in the first place, that means that the affirmative is doomed to fail and just recreate the same assumptions. They have not won a sufficient no-link argument, which means that even if they win that the affirmative sounds like a good idea in proximity, it ultimately just justifies the same system of violence that allows for things in the first place. Look, I told you in the 1NC that the 1AR was going to stand up and grandstand on this idea of a link turn that somehow justifies the perm. However, they have not won that there's any epistemic foundation to their understanding of the world, and any net benefit to the permutation relies on materiality, which is a concept that we have already impact turned.
It will be the case and the critique. Is everyone good?
Voting negative requires you to align yourself with the settler colonial project. The war on drugs has impoverished and criminalized millions of Afghanis. If we win our top level index to the theory of settler colonialism, which was not adequately explained to another, then you should vote for it because the plan is fundamentally a good idea. The framework page, all they assert that there is a macrostructure of settler colonialism, but they have not functionally answered this. The bus bridge evidence that was on the critique page is really good, and they've undercovered it. I'll do the Hurley debate here. We are not settler futurity, we are indigenous futurity. Our Hurley evidence about indigenous values and says that they foreclose an ethical shift towards the ethical orientation of the alternative, because it literally results in the deaths of millions of indigenous people, which means we have impact on their futurity importance. This is important for an ethical shift that we describe, which proves that ensuring futurity comes first. The link debate, they've massively undercovered the bus bridge evidence, which says that their theory fails. There are two reasons. First is that the structural perspective of settler colonialism is bad because it closed down alternative political futures and contradicts the alternative. Progress is bad, then how can decolonization solve? It proves a double turn. This fatalism closes up productive avenues for native liberation. Second is that it shoehorns the the broad theory into contingent circumstances and can't imagine exceptions to this totalizing theory, which is proven in this debate. Their case link flows out and demonstrates how they refuse good liberation strategies because they think that their theory is good. We've proven that contingency is good. Self-determination doesn't solve their fatalism because they refuse the idea of progress. We are and they say good reforms are not happening, but we are the reforms that their fatalism trade off. We've specifically indicted their ability of their theory to respond to contingent circumstance. Contingency is good because it requires us to help specific indigenous people. It requires us to identify specific indigenous peoples. Every like these tribes in Afghanistan that their Miller evidence says that the plan that counter-narcotics aid was used to hurt it. That justifies the permutation. Our Ali evidence is fire, and it says that the reason counter-narcotics aid was done in the first place was because it was meant to limit the autonomy of indigenous people, which proves our Lincoln argument. Our Hurley evidence answers the Madison evidence because it answers the impact of settler futurity. And yes, we've messed up, but fixing contingent violence is good, and insofar as they conceded the contingency good argument. The last argument is this liberal idealism argument. But their liberalism idealism argument assumes that we cannot change, but we've proven it's a flawed understanding and based on conservatism. That was the Mills argument. Also, the alternative doesn't solve case. It requires policy actions. An ethical orientation cannot end decolonization. Vote F on the permutation. We've answered the links. The F is a good idea and is in line with decolonization. That is what the all evidence says. Independently, their theory is a flawed understanding. That was Barcelona.
You said there's coffee in the
Yeah, there should be.
When I went down there, it still hadn't finished brewing, so it's like really weak. But I imagine it might be done by now, but it was real.
real weak. I got weak coffee.
Just not collected. Excuse me, sorry.
Are you also recording the?
Oh, yeah, I should catch, function, thank you. Good catch.
Okay, congratulations everyone on making this on this far to the Harker Westlake tournament. The decision is a 3-0 for the neg. I can go first. It's incredibly frustrating. I think the AF could have easily won if we answered a few key arguments in the 2-NR. First, you're going ham on the permutation in the 2AR, but you don't answer the disadd to the permutation, like this asterisk DA. It's not well explained at all by the neg, but like you have got to answer it because they don't really impact it out whatsoever. I think if you say those things and just kind of explain how the permutation would be able to overcome that disadd, then I think like you're in a really good spot to go for the perm. The next argument is that you have to answer this jurisdiction argument via the Rifkin evidence. Again, not super well like explained by them, but I think that you still have to answer it because it is an argument that is made, just not as well as I personally would have liked it to have made. The other stuff that you have to answer are some of these arguments about settler futurity, and this link kind of happens in multiple places in the 2-NR. I understand you're trying to like link turn this via the Hurley stuff. You just need to sort of like contextualize that to their link explanation, if that makes sense. You need to explain how your understanding of futurity would be able to overcome some of their link arguments about like extinction, for example, and some of the other link arguments they're making about being able to project settler sovereignty in the future. So that's kind of like the TLDR. Some of the other things that I think the AF needed to do, and this actually applies to the neg as well, everyone needs to make examples. Each side was accusing everyone of being so abstract, but everyone was doing the exact same thing. The neg never really explained why settler colonialism is ontological. The top of the 2-NR has like a decent overview about how like settler sovereignty works, but I don't think it comes close to like explaining why it's like ontological. I think everyone needs to do a better job of explaining like examples on both sides. So you need examples of progress. If you want to go for like it's not ontological, you want to go for this bus bridge stuff, you need to give positive examples of when the law has been good and has done good things for indigenous people. Anna, you need to do the opposite. You need to give examples of when policies have been passed that have intended to do good things for indigenous people and how they have failed and why they continually fail indigenous people. Otherwise, you're just kind of making broad abstract claims about like sovereignty and stuff, which are good. We should continue to make those, but we need to contextualize those things. I like some of the stuff you were doing about the war on drugs and whatnot, but I think we need to just like have like sort of more examples. Because if they made a bigger push on sort of like the structurals and stuff, I think we might be a little bit in trouble, more than you would like at least. And then a couple of other random comments. Let's see. That might be all I have. Oh, other random thing. Anna, you were saying the 2-NR that you were like, we're impact turning materiality. I don't think you are. I think the alt is a material land reclamation as you are framing it. It is like a physical and material thing. So like I understand like maybe like what you were trying to say, but the phraseology of it was weird because I was like, I thought this was a material strategy. You need to say akshay. Their framework argument is a double term with the alt because their framework argument is about epistemic decolonization. That care card and Tucky Yang explicitly criticize that, which is why they have an article called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And they explicitly critique epistemic decolonization and epistemic focuses on decolonization. So I think if you point that out, it can be another way to sort of generate offense against the alternative.
I'm sorry, what was the name of that Tucky Yang article?
Decolonization not a metaphor. One, yeah, y'all.
Yeah.
Stay black.
I'm gonna sit on it.
You can go.
Okay. So I more or less agree with the way Dan characterized the debate, but I'll kind of go like more big picture. I feel like we cannot go into a settler colonialism debate in the 2AR and not make a framework argument. Because just think about it, it's like, why would I ever vote on a permutation if there's like a risk of a link argument? And unless you really believe in your heart of hearts that nothing you have said in this debate is a form of settler futurity, but it's not really true because the very first words out of your mouth in the 1AR are, the plan is necessary to stop Afghan farmers from being driven to the arms of the Taliban. So once you've said that, there is a link argument, right? And so now either there needs to be a net benefit that outweighs that link argument, or, an only way to win that is to win that your plan matters and the discourse doesn't matter, so you have to extend the framework argument. Does that make sense? Not extending the framework argument also causes this other problem where that kind of resolves, I think, what Jasmine's saying. It's like Anna described the alt as like giving back the land literally. And you realize at the end of your speech, you have to address this, so you're like, they're just, decolonizing the mind. But she asserted, no, that's not in fact the case. We actually want to get back the land, and that would solve the entirety of the act. So your speech was good in certain parts, but it's like, you can't win unless you want to solve the two F's. The alt can't solve part of the act. You need to first win the act matters. What I said matters. Second, you need to win that alt does not solve the act. It doesn't solve an impact the act solves. And third, you need to win that impact outweighs the impact of the negative things. Like, those are the three things you do in that order. And frankly, I would like ignore flows at that point, you know what I mean? And just kind of go in conceptually in that kind of order. Yeah. I don't know, I don't want to talk too much. I more or less agree with a lot of what Jasmine said. But all I'll say is like, maybe the reason you were kind of weak on these oncology arguments is just like they frankly weren't all that important, if that makes sense. Like, if the act is a strategy for American imperialism, then it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you might need to decide like what strategy you want to go for. You want to go for a permutation, or you want to go for like, we outweigh this thing? Because right now you're asking it on both sides. I don't think it's really going to help you, and it makes some of the arguments you're really good at explaining like not so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree a lot with what Westlake said. I think that maybe in addition, kind of the ground and maybe the perm is that you're kind of in a way giving back the land to indigenous people, not in the United States, but you're giving back sovereignty to the Afghan indigenous people, which like your evidence talks about, you could talk about. So I want more of that. Because if you're trying to go for this and link to me, I think you still obviously link, because of the US politics and like the extinction rating. But I think that maybe there's some ground with kind of making the distinction of the K can deal with, American people, like American indigenous people, but not the Afghani population. Except by this, I guess, kind of resulting in the act in a way, but like, just like make that, I think, more of the prom arc, because you're making that argument as kind of your link turn, but it's not really well explained. There's not really a distinction between America, being colonist in America versus America colonizing other countries too, which is how it solves the how the alt solves that. And I think just more on why like the alt fails, which is kind of your like progress thing, so like all or nothing framing, but like do more of that like on the alt debate, and that will help you with what Joel was saying, weighing against, is if you take the alt down, then it's easier to weigh your thing because what you're weighing against is smaller.
A couple of other things for you, actually, I was going to say. To answer this settler guilt link argument, I think you can say a few things. First, you said you should ask them cross-eyes, like, is there a way to condemn U.S. military aid without it being emblematic of settler guilt? Like, what is the way that the U.S. can take responsibility for all its like messed up like actions, right, in committing violence abroad, and it not being emblematic of settler guilt, right? Like, yeah. Next, you should also ask, what does the alt do for Afghani indigenous farmers? This is where you need to press a little bit more on like the alt's ability to solve the case, because like you need to say like even if like the alt would like evaporate the government and like no more military aid, is that reverse causal? Does that stop airstrikes? Like what do we do with like all of our military aid? Like what about the truth? Like how does you need to question the alt's ability to solve, right? You could also say that actually voting on the alternative, it link turns this settler guilt argument, because it allows the settlers on like the panel to relieve some of their guilt as settlers, because we think that by voting neg we're giving back the land, right? You could say it like leads to passivity and assumes that like we've done something good or ethical like as settlers, when in reality nothing really happens, right? Like we voted neg, unfortunately we're all in stolen land still, right? So like think about how those things sort of like interact with like the judges sometimes, right? And the way that, some of those ethics arguments are like implicated. To answer Dally, this is just like the native death K. It's like the native security K. Whenever someone goes for the security K, what do they have to do? They have to win defense, right? They have to prove that your threats aren't real. Don't forget that in this debate. You need to be like, you can't just say that like our threats are fabricated without making a case argument. So just like push back on that.
I'm just gonna reiterate this number. I'm not so sure if we got it. It's like, and I guess maybe I'll start with my talking to you. I kind of feel like, so you were good in this debate, but it seems like you're going through the motions in the sense that like a lot of what you said doesn't seem to be a specific response to this ad. And by that I mean you're not identifying the particular link cards in the 1AC which do the things they are saying over there outside of like extinction. So like, I mean, this ad app is a strategy for winning the hearts and minds of Afghan farmers, right? So talk about the solvency cards, which essentially say this is key to the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan. That's kind of what I think is missing from the bill. And this is why I'm saying, like, you got to decide what strategy you want. Like, your app clearly links to this. I understand your plan is helpful in a way, but the epistemic kind of foundation of the app. And so you might need to defend U.S. legitimacy. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, like, I don't exactly know that what you're doing right now will be super effective unless you want to bring an argument or, you know, defend that kind of knowledge.
So does that need to start, like, the framework stuff being?
I don't care where it starts. I don't, like, that stuff is not really important to me, but I'm just saying right now you're going for a we don't think strategy when that you do. Your plan like that, but everything else about the apps needs to.
Another thing you could do actually is that one thing I thought that it could have been easy to sort of get out of this DALI link is that you don't have like an extinction scenario in like the 1AC, right? Like you just say like global nuclear war, but then like on your framing cell you're like the PUMR existential risk. You could just get out that, you could just take out that PUMR card and just say, so that, because then now they don't have a link to like extinction framing, you're just like, yeah, like it'd be bad if like a war happened, like, right? Like we can all agree that like wars are bad, cause lots of bad stuff, then no extinction. Yep.
Anything else?
I just have like two quick questions, one for you. So what about the 1AR needed to change? Because like I get a lot of the 2AR comments. So other than like forefronting the framework argument a little bit more, is there anything else that needs to change?
No, I think well, I mean,
like was it 2AR execution or 1AR setup?
it's mostly 2AR execution, but in order to do this, okay, so like in this particular debate, if you want framework and that was set up in 1AR, then you'd have been fine. But kind of more foundationally, there probably needs to be more evidence defending Zettler fiscal policies, basically, because like that was a strategy for global governance, and there's not really cards to say that's a strategy.
I was gonna say that agree with the framework thing that needs to happen like in the 1AR. This needs to be like a standard like policy framework, like right? Just be like, no, like winning a link doesn't mean you win the debate.
Right.
Like winning the FYI that set calls on module does not mean you win the debate. You have to win a reason as to how like the alt like solves the case, solves the links, like set up like neg burdens basically, and like just kind of be like don't vote neg just because they like say that that one part of the app is unethical. Like you know what I'm saying? Like set up some of those policy oriented framework arguments because the way that these debates shake down is like we want to do this and that's unethical, like you know vote neg. So just kind of like play defense to those arguments.
I think she answered that stuff. Real quick.
It's like number 4 in the doc.
Yeah, you were like, roll the ballot, you don't get to win just because we got a little argument, and that's bad for ground.
So I guess then your answered my question is like how important do you think the framework argument is in the 1AR? So yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, you got to have that. I think at the both like
And the 2AR.
yeah, both like just in every speech. If you think that you're gonna debate the K at some point, I think especially in LD because of the time, like set it up early on. Like here's how you evaluate the app, and then just like consequentialism type stuff. And she even concedes that like they don't foreclose consequentialism, so then you need to jump on that auction and be like, all right, consequentialism, boom, let's go. Let's evaluate the consequences of the app and the consequences of the law, right? And just compare those things.
Thank you.
Good work, y'all.
Good luck with that.